two ancient civilizations, two powerful stories of how our world began. One enshrined in clay tablets buried for millennia beneath desert sands, the other preserved in humanity's most influential book. What if I told you that the opening lines of the Bible, words that billions have revered for centuries, echo an older story? A forgotten Babylonian epic where gods wage war, a cosmic monster is slain, and the world is fashioned from her corpse. Genesis 1 and the Enuma Elish, two creation accounts composed centuries apart, yet connected by striking parallels that scholars have debated for generations. The implications are explosive, challenging our understanding of Scripture's origins. In this video, we'll journey back to ancient Mesopotamia and Israel to unravel this cosmic mystery. We'll examine the evidence through the eyes of leading scholars who've pieced together these ancient puzzles, revealing connections that were hidden in plain sight for thousands of years. This isn't just academic trivia. It's a story that reshapes how we understand the roots of Western religion and challenges us to reconsider what it means when sacred texts draw inspiration from older sources. I'm Derek Lambert, and this is MythVision. Before we dive into these ancient waters, make sure you've subscribed and hit that notification bell. Help support us. We could really use your support. Trust me, after seeing the evidence we're about to present, you'll never read Genesis the same way again. Special shout out to Dr. Joshua Bowen for helping me with this script and inspiring me to compare these stories. Our story begins not in Jerusalem, but in ancient Babylon, a city of hanging gardens, towering ziggurats, and the birthplace of astronomy. Here, long before the writing of the Hebrew Bible, priests recited an epic tale during the New Year's festival called Akitu. Imagine the scene. Crowds gather as priests in elaborate robes chant the sacred words of an epic of creation, where the younger warrior deity is raised to supremacy over the divine pantheon. The statue of Marduk, Babylon's supreme deity, parades through the streets paved with glazed blue brick. Incense fills the air as the epic unfolds across 7 tablets. This wasn't some obscure myth. The Enuma Elish, named for its opening words meaning win on high, was Babylon's blockbuster narrative, the foundation of their cosmic worldview and religious identity. So what exactly does this epic tell us? Buckle up. It's pretty wild. Before anything existed, there were 2 primordial beings, Apsu, the freshwater ocean, and Tiamat, the saltwater sea. These watery deities mingle, and from their union, generations of gods are born. But there's trouble in paradise. The younger gods are noisy, disrupting Apsu's rest. Enraged, he plots to destroy his divine children. Before he can act, however, the clever god Ea discovers the plot and kills Apsu. This act ultimately leads to a cosmic war. Marduk is born to Ea and his wife Damkina. In their new home, the Apsu and Marduk, the strongest of the gods, begins to cause unrest among Tiamat and some of the other gods. Tiamat, now a widow, creates an army of 11 horrific creatures, scorpion men, lion men, and more, to silence the troublesome gods and avenge her husband's death. The younger gods panic, even 2 of the mightiest among them, Ea and Anu, until one steps forward, Marduk, son of Ea. He volunteers to fight Tiamat, but only if the gods grant him supreme power. They agree, crown him king, and Marduk prepares for cosmic battle. The confrontation is cataclysmic. Marduk and Tiamat meet in single combat. He let fly an arrow and pierced her belly. He tore open her entrails and slit her inwards. He bound her and extinguished her life. He threw down her corpse and stood on it. This is Scholar Lambert, Tablet 4, lines 101 to 104. Tiamat falls. Victory is his. But now comes the fascinating part. Marduk doesn't just discard his enemy's corpse. He gets creative. He split her into 2 like a dried fish. One half of her he set up and stretched out the heavens. He stretched out the skin and appointed a watch with the instruction not to let her waters escape. From Tiamat's carcass, Marduk fashions our cosmos. Her upper half becomes the sky, holding back the celestial waters. Her eyes become the sources of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Her saliva becomes the clouds. This is cosmic recycling on a divine scale. Then Marduk organizes time itself, creating the calendar. He appointed the year, marked off divisions, and set up 3 stars each for the 12 months. After he had organized the year, he established the heavenly station of Nibiru to fix the stars' intervals. Finally, Marduk decides to create humanity, but not out of love or divine purpose. He needs workers. I will bring together blood and form bone. I will bring into being Lulu, whose name shall be man. I will create Lulu, man, on whom the toil of the gods will be laid, that they may rest. Marduk executes Kingu, Tiamat's general, and from his blood, humans are formed. Our purpose? To do the work the gods no longer wish to perform. We're essentially cosmic maintenance staff. The epic concludes with the gods building Babylon as Marduk's eternal headquarters. They feast in his temple, recline in divine leisure, and declare 50 names and titles for their champion, each praising his power and wisdom. So what does all this have to do with the Bible? Let's travel west, to Jerusalem, where centuries later a very different creation story would emerge, one with striking echoes from this Babylonian epic. When God began to create the heavens and the earth, compared to Enuma Elish's divine battle, Genesis feels restrained, almost minimalist. No sea goddess, no monsters, no combat. Just one God speaking creation into existence. Most critical scholars date the written composition of Genesis 1 to the 6th or 5th centuries BCE, during or shortly after the Babylonian exile, when Jerusalem's elite were forcibly relocated to Babylon. This timing is important. Imagine Jewish priests and scribes captive in the heart of Babylon, where the Enuma Elish was public knowledge every year. They would have heard it recited at festivals, seen its imagery and art, and when they sat down to compile their own sacred texts, well, the parallels become rather astonishing. As Assyriologist Eckhart Fromm puts it, the author of the first creation account in the Bible, in contrast, speaking to an inner audience, those who believed in the God of Israel, used the epic as a template for a thoroughly revised version of how the world had come into being. Assyriologist Joshua Bowen agrees, Genesis is deeply rooted in and inspired by and reacting to far older texts like the Enuma Elish, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and other ancient Near Eastern compositions, yet it transforms those roots dramatically. Let's examine these parallels one by one. The evidence is frankly stunning. Both stories begin with water, formless, chaotic, and primeval. Enuma Elish opens when heaven on high had not been named and the ground below was not given a name, primordial Apsu who fathered them, and the creative force Tiamat who gave birth to them all were mingling together their waters. Genesis begins when God began to create the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered over the surface of the waters. Did you catch that? The Hebrew word for the deep, Tehom, linguistically resembles the name Tiamat. This isn't coincidence. In Babylon, Tiamat is a goddess, a monster of chaos. In Genesis 1, Tehom is just water. No personality, no rebellion. The Genesis author takes the chaotic, monstrous deity and turns her into an inert substance, a cosmic demotion of epic proportions. As scholars say, Genesis drains the monster and leaves only the sea. In both traditions, creation proceeds by dividing these primordial waters. In Enuma Elish, Marduk splits Tiamat's body, using half to form the sky, which holds back the celestial waters. Genesis echoes this with God separating waters above from waters below with the firmament, dome. The concept is identical, a barrier keeping cosmic waters at bay, but Genesis removes the violence. No slaying needed. God simply speaks. Consider this. Both traditions recognize that water comes in two forms, salt and fresh, which don't naturally mix. In Mesopotamia, this became personified as Apsu, freshwater, and Tiamat, saltwater. Genesis retains the water imagery but strips away the divine personalities. As Eckhart Fromm argues, the demythologizing of the priestly writer in Genesis 1 is described in this way. What he produced instead can be characterized as a counter-story to the epic, aimed at thoroughly demythologizing it and implicitly criticizing some of its central tenets. Both traditions move to the creation of celestial bodies. This is where the parallels become undeniable. In Genesis, day 4, God creates the sun, moon, and stars to separate the day from the night and let them serve as signs to mark seasons and days and years. Compare Enuma Elish. He appointed the year, marked off divisions, and he set up 3 stars each for the 12 months. After he had organized the year, he established the heavenly station of Nibiru to fix the stars' intervals. Both texts emphasize the celestial bodies as timekeepers. Both establish a calendar. This isn't merely describing what stars do, it's depicting their purpose in strikingly similar terms. Even more revealing, Genesis says these lights are for signs. The Hebrew word otot, which is etymologically related to the Akkadian word itu, meaning ominous signs from the stars. In essence, Genesis is acknowledging the Babylonian understanding that stars signal divine intentions, but reframes it within monotheism. The stars mark Jewish sacred times, not omens from multiple gods. Notice too that Genesis never calls these bodies by their names, sun or moon, instead using greater light and lesser light. Why? Because in neighboring cultures, sun and moon were deities, Shamash and Sin in Babylon. Genesis deliberately avoids these names to emphasize they are objects, not gods. This is theological revolution disguised as creation story. Each parallel hides a critique of polytheism. Now for something unexpected: sea monsters. In Enuma Elish, Tiamat creates 11 horrible monsters to fight the gods: dragons, scorpion men, fishmen. After his victory, Marduk chains up the 11 monsters, Tiamat's unholy brood. Surprisingly, Genesis mentions sea monsters too. On day 5, God created the great sea creatures, Tananim. The Hebrew word Tananim can be translated as sea monsters or dragons, linguistically related to the Ugaritic Tananu. This is brilliant subversion. In Babylon and in Ugarit, sea monsters are terrifying chaos beings that gods must battle. In Genesis, they're just another part of creation, made by God and pronounced good. It's like saying, those sea monsters you've heard about in myths, yeah, God made those too. They're just big fish. Another fascinating parallel, the divine council. Enuma Elish frequently mentions gods assembling in council to crown Marduk as champion, to decree his kingship, to plan humanity's creation. Genesis suddenly shifts to plural language when creating humans. Let us make humankind in our image, after our likeness. This mysterious us has puzzled readers for centuries. Most critical scholars interpret this as God addressing a divine council, heavenly beings who attend him. This isn't polytheism. It's a literary technique borrowed from Mesopotamian literature where gods consult each other before major decisions. The biblical author retained this divine council scene deliberately, adapting the polytheistic framework into monotheistic theology. God consults his court, but he alone creates. As scholar Kenton Sparks argues that the Enuma Elish is a priestly mimesis, where the author of Genesis 1 sought to bestow upon Israel and upon Israel's religion the air of antiquity and authority that was attached to all things Mesopotamian. Both traditions place humanity's creation near the climax, but with vastly different purposes. In Enuma Elish, Marduk announces, "I will create Lulu, man, on whom the toil of the gods will be laid, that they may rest." Humans are created as divine servants, slaves, fashioned from the blood of a slain god, Kingu, to do the work the gods find beneath them. Genesis gives humanity a noble purpose. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and every animal. Humans are God's representatives made in His image and likeness. Kenton Sparks notes that this conception of human identity was by no means foreign to Mesopotamia. But as Nahum Sarna has pointed out, in Mesopotamia the image of God was generally reserved for the king. From this we can reasonably conclude that the priestly writer was drawing on Mesopotamian tradition in order to depict the first human couple as royalty. Any doubts are dispelled by P's primeval genealogy in Genesis 5, where the list of patriarchs from Adam to Noah is fashioned precisely in the manner of the Mesopotamian king's list. The contrast is stark. In Babylon, humans exist to serve the gods' needs, feeding them through sacrifices so deities can rest from labor. In Genesis, humans are given authority over creation as God's representatives. We're not divine servants, but royalty. Both traditions conclude with rest and the number 7. Enuma Elish spans 7 tablets, with the final tablet devoted entirely to praising Marduk's 50 titles. After creation is complete, the gods celebrate. The great gods sat down, beer mugs were set out, and they sat at the banquet. Genesis concludes with God resting on the 7th day. And on the 7th day, God finished the work that He had done, and He rested on the 7th day from all the work that He had done. In Enuma Elish, the gods build Marduk a temple called Esagila as their resting place after creation. They explicitly say, "Let us make a shrine of renown. Your chamber will be our resting place where we may repose." Genesis transforms this concept. Instead of a physical temple, God creates the Sabbath, a temple in time rather than space. The 7th day becomes sacred, blessed, and set apart. Hebrew Bible scholar Ronald Hindle writes, "The idea of God's rest after His work of creation has analogues in other Near Eastern texts. In Enuma Elish, the god Ea rests in his newly acquired temple after his defeat of Apsu and Mumu. Later, the god Marduk rests after his defeat of Tiamat. The resting of the deity after the conquest of chaos seems to be in the distant background of God's rest after His work of creation in Genesis 1. The distinctive differences are the lack of conflict here. It is a creation without opposition, and the later ritual participation in God's rest. The pattern of 7 wasn't randomly chosen. It was a deliberate echo of the 7-tablet structure of Babylon's creation epic, transformed to establish Israel's weekly Sabbath cycle. So what do scholars make of these parallels? A century ago, scholars like Hermann Gunkel first suggested Genesis drew on Babylonian creation motifs. Initially, many resisted, emphasizing the differences. But as more texts were discovered and analyzed, the parallels became harder to dismiss. Biblical scholar David Carr argues Genesis 1 represents a resistant counter-narrative or counter-representation to the Enuma Elish, rather than a mere extension, revision, or allusion to it. Assyriologist Eckhart Fromm states that what the priestly writer composed can be characterized as a counter-story to the epic, aimed at thoroughly demythologizing it and implicitly critiquing some of its central tenets. Not everyone agrees completely. Some scholars emphasize the differences. Genesis has no combat myth, is rigorously monotheistic, and portrays creation as orderly divine speech rather than divine warfare. Old Testament scholar Victor Hamilton wrote in his commentary on Genesis several arguments against the connections between the Enuma Elish and Genesis 1, including even if the etymological equivalence of Tehom and Tiamat can be granted, this still does not demonstrate that the biblical creation story has a Babylonian background. The deep of Genesis 1 is so far removed in function from the Tiamat of Enuma Elish that any possible relationship is blurred beyond recognition. And one may compare the creation of the sky as delineated in these verses with the parallel in Enuma Elish to see some of the wide discrepancy in mentality between the biblical story and the pagan account. This is in Hamilton's 1990 Genesis commentary. Clearly for Hamilton, the differences between these compositions strongly argue for a lack of dependence. But historical context makes borrowing plausible. During the Babylonian exile, Jewish scribes were immersed in Mesopotamian culture. We know some exiles, like Daniel in tradition, were educated in Babylonian literature. Far from embracing pagan religion, these authors were engaging with it intellectually, taking prestigious literary frameworks and filling them with Israel's theology. So what does this mean for our understanding of Genesis? Rather than diminishing Genesis, these parallels enrich our understanding. The biblical authors weren't naive. They were sophisticated theologians engaging with the dominant cultural myths of their time. Imagine Jewish exiles in Babylon, hearing Enuma Elish recited, seeing Marduk exalted, their temple destroyed, their nation conquered. It would be natural to wonder, is Marduk stronger than our God? Did Babylon's gods defeat ours? Genesis 1 answers with defiance. No. The same cosmic order Babylon attributes to Marduk, we attribute to our God, without the violence, without the pantheon, without the divine drama. Our God needs no battle to establish order. He speaks, and it is. For its original audience, Genesis wasn't describing creation. It was reclaiming their worldview from Babylonian theology. Each parallel carries a theological critique. One God, not many, humans as divine image bearers, not slaves, creation by peaceful word, not violent combat. Genesis wasn't written to answer modern scientific questions about the universe's origins. It was addressing ancient theological questions. Who is God? What's humanity's purpose? How does our God compare to other nations' deities? Far from undermining faith, this context helps us appreciate the genius of Genesis. Its authors took the mythological language of the time and filled it with new meaning, creating a powerful statement of faith. God brings order without conflict, light without limit, and rest without need. Genesis 1 and Enuma Elish stand as two versions of creation from civilizations that shaped our world. One has been recited in temples and churches for thousands of years. The other was lost for millennia beneath desert sands until archaeologists unearthed it in the 1800s. Their connection reminds us that the sacred texts don't emerge from a vacuum. They arise from human communities wrestling with eternal questions, drawing on available cultural resources to express transcendent truths. These parallels don't tell us Genesis is merely a copy of older myths. They reveal something more profound. They show us minds across centuries engaged in cosmic conversation, reaching for language to describe the ineffable, using familiar patterns to express new visions. Perhaps the most moving aspect is that we can still hear voices across thousands of years. The empires that produced these texts have crumbled to dust. Babylon is ruins. Ancient Israel was conquered repeatedly, yet their stories endure, still speaking to us about order from chaos, purpose from void, meaning from mystery. When you next read "In the beginning," remember the ancient scribe who wrote those words, perhaps an exile in Babylon, defiant in defeat, taking the conqueror's story and transforming it to declare that history belongs not to the victors with their many gods, but to the one God who speaks worlds into being. Two ancient peoples looked at the same stars, felt the same rains, walked the same earth, and crafted stories to make sense of it all. Their voices, separated by centuries, still echo in our quest to understand our place in the vast, mysterious cosmos. This is the power of our oldest stories. Not that they explain the mechanics of creation, but that they connect us to our deepest questions about meaning and purpose. As we've seen, these connections run deeper than we ever imagined. I'm Derek Lambert, and this is MythVision. If you've enjoyed this journey into ancient text, please subscribe and join us next time as we continue exploring the forgotten stories that shaped our world. Until then, look up at the same stars our ancestors wondered about, and remember, the conversation they started continues through us. Please join our Patreon and help support us. We could use your help more now than ever. And take one of our scholarly courses at mvp-courses.com. My wife, the Queen of MythVision, runs that side. You're helping us, you're helping yourself, high quality videos, own them for life, and you're helping the academics that help shape this world we call MythVision. Thank you so much.